Anthony Perkins, forever remembered as Norman Bates in Alfred Hitchcock's legendary 1960 film Psycho, is one of those rare Hollywood figures whose life story feels like a haunting mirror of the roles he played. And when people talk about horror icons, his name comes up first. Not just because of the chilling performance that changed the genre forever, but because of the hidden struggles, the quiet tragedies, and the pain that defined his off-screen reality. And to truly understand why his legacy is now being talked about again thanks to Netflix's monster, The Ed Gein Story, you have to dive deep into the complicated layers of his career, his personal life, and the brutal clash between fame and secrecy that followed him until his final days. For Perkins was not just an actor, he was a symbol of both the intoxicating power and the destructive cost of Hollywood. Born in 1932 as the son of stage and screen actor Osgood Perkins, Anthony grew up in a world where cinema and performance were not distant dreams, but an inevitable part of his identity. And when he rose to prominence in his late teens, quickly establishing himself as a heartthrob and teen idol, people thought they were witnessing the arrival of a golden boy destined to dominate Hollywood forever. And his role in Friendly Persuasion in 1956 earned him an Academy Award nomination, immediately solidifying him as one of the brightest young talents of his generation. But as is often the case in Hollywood, fate had a darker twist in store. Because just 4 years later, his life would change forever when Alfred Hitchcock cast him as Norman Bates, the seemingly shy and nervous motel keeper whose murderous alter ego shocked audiences in Psycho. And while the film became a masterpiece that changed cinematic language, that same role built a prison around Perkins' career, typecasting him for decades, forcing him to relive Norman Bates in countless ways, unable to escape the shadow of that character. And even though he starred in other films, including dramas, comedies, and stage performances, the world never stopped calling him Norman, never stopped reducing his identity to that chilling smile and that unforgettable shower scene. And this is where the tragedy deepens, because Anthony Perkins was a man fighting two battles, one against Hollywood's rigid system of typecasting and another against a society that forced him to keep his true self locked in the shadows. For during the 1950s and 1960s, homosexuality was not only stigmatized, but actively suppressed in the film industry, with studios and managers controlling the personal lives of their stars to protect box office appeal, and Perkins, who had relationships with men such as dancer Grover Dale and actor Tab Hunter, had to live in secrecy, hiding what should have been natural, forced into a silence that took a toll on his mental well-being. And while he was celebrated publicly for his charm, his talent, and his on-screen magnetism, privately he endured the weight of fear, repression, and the loneliness that comes from never being fully seen. And yet in 1973, he made a surprising decision that would alter the course of his life, marrying Berry Berenson, an actress and photographer, and together they built a marriage that endured nearly 2 decades, bringing 2 sons into the world, Oz and Elvis, who became his most personal legacy. And though some critics at the time speculated about the nature of the marriage, what is undeniable is that Perkins and Berenson shared a bond that lasted until his final breath. And that final breath came too soon, tragically, on September 12, 1992, when Anthony Perkins died of AIDS-related pneumonia at the age of 60, a devastating end for a man who had spent much of his life hiding truths about himself. And when his passing became public, many saw it as not just the loss of a great actor, but as another reminder of the cruel silence imposed on so many during the AIDS crisis, a silence that robbed people of their voices, their dignity, and their stories. And yet, as if fate was not done with tragedy, Berry Berenson herself would later perish in one of the darkest moments of modern history. On September 11, 2001, when she boarded American Airlines Flight 11 and became one of the victims of the terrorist attacks, her name forever engraved on the 9/11 memorial in New York. And so, the Perkins-Berenson family became marked by loss upon loss, a story so drenched in sorrow it feels almost cinematic in itself. But to focus only on the tragedy would be to miss the complexity of Anthony Perkins' legacy. For he was more than Norman Bates, more than a closeted actor, more than a man struck down by illness. He was a brilliant talent who understood the art of subtlety, who could communicate fear, vulnerability, and madness with the slightest gesture, whose performance in Psycho was not just acting, but transformation. And while Hollywood boxed him in, audiences knew they were watching someone unique, someone unforgettable. And this is why today, when Netflix releases Monster, the Ed Gein Story, revisiting the horrific real-life killer whose crimes inspired Robert Bloch's novel and Hitchcock's film, people are once again pulled back into the world of Norman Bates, and by extension into the story of Anthony Perkins, for without him, Norman Bates would never have become the icon he is. And as viewers binge the new series, they cannot help but reconsider Perkins, not just as an actor, but as a human being caught in the crossfire between fame and fear, art and stigma, success and suffering. And in doing so, they are reminded of the brutal truth that Hollywood's brightest stars often live in the darkest shadows, that the roles that make them legends often trap them in cages, and that behind every scream that shakes the screen lies a performer whose own heart is breaking in silence. And in that silence lies the legacy of Anthony Perkins, a man whose life tells us as much about talent as it does about the cruelty of the world he lived in, and whose memory, revived once again, proves that even decades after his passing, the story of Norman Bates is not just about a fictional killer, but about a real man who carried his own private horrors until the very end.